Welcome to our session. We appreciate your time. And due to the fact that maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, my name is Einar Bohlin. I'm the Vice President of the Government Affairs Department. That's effective in 2021. I've been at ARIN for, well, it's easier to say which year I started, 2003. Quite a few years in various roles at ARIN. I've been in the Government Affairs Department now for about 5 years. And before that, I was the manager of the policy development process at ARIN. And it's been obviously I've been there a while. It's been a wonderful time. It's a great place to work, and I can't say enough about it. Thank you, Glenn and Professor Calderon, for having me here today. On behalf of John Curran, President and CEO of ARIN, ARIN is happy to support this activity. And of course, John sent his regrets. So let's get started. All right. So ARIN and the RIRs. This slide set starts out with a high-level look at the RIR system. And then we talk about some of the other organizations that are part of the ecosystem. And we dive into a closer look at what ARIN does. Next slide, please. So a regional internet registry. Fundamentally, we allocate number resources and we keep track of what we allocate by putting those allocations into a database or registry. And by number resources, as an RIR, those are IPv4 and IPv6 number addresses and autonomous system numbers. There are 5 regional internet registries. ARIN was actually the 3rd registry, not the first, as some people might think. The first one was RIP, which is a French acronym for Registry IP European, and it was formed in '92. And you can see here on the slide the area that it covers. The second registry was APNIC, Asia Pacific Network Information Center, formed in '93. And then ARIN was formed in '97. ARIN's region is Canada, the US, and many of the islands in the Caribbean. Then you had LACNIC in 2002, formed with Mexico, Central America, South America, and also some islands in the Caribbean. And finally, AFRINIC, formed in 2005. The dots there are kind of interesting. The only one that's really pretty close is AFRINIC. AFRINIC is based in Mauritius. RIPE's in Amsterdam. APNIC is in Brisbane. LACNIC is pretty close in Uruguay. And ARIN is in outside Washington, D.C. Next slide. Core functions. These are common functions. I see a question in chat. I have a slide about the fellowship program. We will get to that. Thank you, Glenn. The core functions of all the RIRs are to manage the number resources within their regions, to maintain the directory of those allocations, which is most commonly understood to be who is. But we also have other directories, including a who was. Sometimes sometimes the organization changes, maybe mergers and acquisitions or even transfers. So there is a registry where you can see the history of an IP address, who it's been allocated to over time. We also have routing registries, and I'll get into that more later. The RIRs also do reverse DNS. I mean, the most common understood use of DNS is to put, for example, www.example.com into a browser, and you might not know, but DNS converts that to an IP address and resolves and provides you the web page. We do the opposite. We support the opposite. You can take an IP address and find out what that maps to. And that turns out to be useful still for troubleshooting. We support the infrastructure through technical coordination, outreach, and education, and we facilitate the policy process. It's important to note that the policies for allocation of number resources are not dictated by the RIRs. They're created and maintained by our communities, and we help that process. We facilitate the policy process, but we do not make the policies. Next slide, please. The RIRs are independent. We are not government organizations. We do not report to them. We are nonprofit or not-for-profit based on where you are. For example, ARIN is a nonprofit incorporated in the state of Virginia, which means that we have an articles of incorporation and bylaws. The other registries have similar based on where they are. We're community funded. We get fees for services, not for the actual resources. We're all membership based. As far as ARIN is concerned, that's required as by law when you are a nonprofit incorporated in the state of Virginia. We're community regulated. I talked about the policy process a little bit. We don't make the policies. We implement the policies that are created and maintained by our communities. We have boards or executive committees that are elected, which is the top of the, which set strategy and have fiduciary responsibilities for our organizations. And we're open and transparent. All of the RIRs have mailing lists that are completely open to anyone who's interested. You don't have to be in the region. You don't have to be in the region to get their documentation. I think that's pretty typical for internet organizations. Next, please.
Einar, before we move on to the next slide, I do have a question. When you mention membership-based and you say that it's based, the membership is based on holders of number resources, can an individual be a member of ARIN or IRRs if they have a website and domain?
Thank you for that question, Professor Calderon. Membership is kind of tricky. At ARIN in particular, it's changing right now. As we go from 21 to 22, membership is going to be based on not only holding a resource, but on participating in policy discussions and participating in elections. I don't know I don't know at this time, but I could look and get information about membership in the other RIRs. And actually, there's a document, which I'll plug right now, which is a policy matrix available on the Number Resource Organization website and the RIR websites. And it compares the policies of all five RIRs in one document. And I'm pretty sure that it has text in there about membership. I'll send a link if I can to you after this presentation, if that's helpful. I'm open to suggestions about how to help answer this question better.
Sure, you can send us the link and we'll share it with the participants, actually. Glenn is actually has a related question. How much synergy or policy exchange happens between the other IRRs? And I guess you pointed out that there's a common document between the different regional organizations, and probably that is the best way to figure out how much synergy and policy development interaction is between the different regions.
Thank you for that question. We have at ARIN an advisory council, and many years ago, the advisory council at ARIN has a key role in making the final decision about consensus on policies at ARIN. As proposals are turned into adopted policy, the advisory council makes that final determination. And these are volunteers elected by the ARIN membership. And many years ago, the advisory council started to attend other RIR meetings. And so ARIN will send 1 or 2 advisory council members to other RIR meetings to see what policies are being discussed in those regions, and to see and to bring that information back to ARIN. And when invited to speak, perhaps an open mic at those other RIR meetings, to let them know what's going on in our region. So there is some synergy, but there isn't. It's not a coordinated activity. It's the whole point of the RIRs are to have policy that's the good policy for that region. So policy doesn't have to be the same at all the RIRs, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The internet ecosystem. I'm going to focus mostly here on that left set of circles. And I'm going to talk with an example. We'll start in the middle with internet users. So the point of this slide is to show perhaps the complexity of the ecosystem. And to do that, let's say, well, right now we're all internet users. We're all on this platform using the internet. And in order to do that, we have to have an internet provider of some kind. I'm, for example, at home, so I'm paying an ISP to provide me access. I'm using the application, big blue button. The content is this presentation that's being done live and will be recorded and available later in even different formats. And everybody pretty much understands, maybe they don't understand how that works, but they expect it to work. And for it to work, you need that outer ring, which this slide labels enablers. And to start at like the 3 o'clock position, one of the enablers is the RIR system, the number registries. Every device on the internet needs an IP address to be able to communicate with other devices. And let's go clockwise. The next enabler here is standard bodies. One of those, of course, is the IETF, which does protocols. You have operator groups. For example, NANOG, the North American Network Operator Group, which meets, and these are ISPs, content providers, application providers. They meet and share experiences and help each other make sure that the internet runs. You have NGOs, and to me, NGOs are involved with things such as human rights online, the right to assemble, the right to free speech, the right to privacy. Those organizations are working for those types of goals on behalf of internet users. You have industry associations. So for example, access providers. I mean, there are ISP associations. First one that comes to mind is one that used to be the Florida, but now it's the Federated ISP Association. It's a good organization for small, medium ISPs. You have ICANN, which has its function, and I have a slide on that file, coming up in this set. You have governments. So what do governments do as an enabler of the internet? Well, for example, in the U.S. right now, they've designated funds to expand broadband to rural and remote areas across the U.S. to promote and help the internet grow. They're also concerned about things such as data sovereignty. making sure that the data regarding their citizens is somehow protected by the government. And of course, many other things. Cybersecurity is probably today the top priority of governments. It's their role to protect critical infrastructure. And then you have nonprofits. I think on more than I think, I know that on a slide coming up, I have an example of a nonprofit, which is ISOC, which is an organization which was founded to promote the development and good use of the internet. So it's in a way it's complicated, and it's not always coordinated by everyone. But a thing that I would like to point out here is there is in a way, a common denominator, which happens to be the number registries. All of these organizations working online need numbers, and in a way, the number registries tend to coordinate some of the discussion and activity of these groups. And I'll skip the right side of the slide. We've already gone over that. Here's a slide on ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. They primarily are concerned with the domain name system, and they coordinate policy development related to that, and they operate the IANA function. And by the way, on these slides, ICANN, IANA, for example, I'm doing the best to describe them, but I'm not the authoritative resource. Of course, they have their own websites and their own spokespeople, and please go to them directly to find out more information about who they are and what they do. IANA is the Internet Assigned Number Authority, and they're responsible for the technical coordination of the DNS route, IP addressing, and other protocols. An example of other protocols are port numbers. And when we say that they coordinate IP addressing, IANA's role in IP addressing is to be the resource where RIRs obtain their numbers. So there are policies for the RIRs, for example, to reach 80% of our utilization as an RIR, and then to go to the IANA and apply for more number space. That's for V4, V6, and autonomous system numbers. Noting, of course, that there's very, very little, if no, IPv4 address space. ISOC is a nonprofit formed in '92, and I pulled this from their site. They're to promote the open development, evolution, and use of the internet for the benefit of all people throughout the world. Recent activities that I've seen ISOC do, which have been very helpful for the internet, are promoting internet exchange points, and then just in general, promoting universal and meaningful connectivity. Community networks is something that they've been promoting, which has been really good work. Next slide, please. I mentioned the IETF on that previous slide about enablers as a standard development organization. Founded in '86, they developed the Internet Protocol Suite. It's an open organization. Register, attend, go discuss the details of protocols. They meet three times a year, and they rotate around the world. And if one comes near you, I recommend considering attending. The NRO is the Number Resource Organization. This is an organization that was formed by the RIRs signing a joint MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And the NRO acts as a focal point for information not only into the RIR system, but out out of all the RIRs. For example, when we have a common position, for example, on promoting the deployment of V6, we'll sometimes go to events, exhibitions, and set up an NRO booth manned by staff from the local RIR and promote V6, promote the RIRs. The NROs, it's technically not. It's not a it's technically it's an organization, but it's not incorporated or anything like that. It's just a coordinating body for things. For example, we all run a registry, but for that registry to really work, it needs to be a globally integrated registry. So there is an NRO email list for the engineers, and there's an NRO email list for the comms department and for the registration department, and it is just to coordinate activities that need global coordination. I see a question in chat. Does the NRO have any power or authority over any individual RIR? Absolutely not. There's an executive board or executive team at the NRO, which is the 5 CEOs, and they just have a monthly coordination. I think it's a monthly coordination call, but there's no power over the RIRs. Good question.
So Einar, I'm sorry, this is another question. So in regards to the situation between AFRINIC and one of the organizations that has some allocated IP addresses, does the NRO have any influence over aiding them in case they need some kind of support, or is that something that they just give some advice, but the AFRINIC group has to decide how they want to proceed?
Thank you for that question. There is I forget the exact term, but it's an emergency stability fund. All of the RIRs chipped in and put some money into a fund, into a pool, into a fund to be used in case of an emergency. Should one of the RIRs have an emergency and wish to draw on that fund, then all the RIRs would have to, I'd imagine that the CEOs would meet and discuss the emergency and make a decision about whether the emergency met the criteria and consider releasing the funds to help the RIR in question. Regarding AFRINIC, that was not implemented. It was looked at from the side of getting ready in case it was called upon, but happy to say that AFRINIC is very capably managing all by itself.
So Siva has a series of questions there, and I guess they're all related to the AFRINIC situation and the role NROs have with the different regional internet registries. So I'll let you read them.
All right, let me take a look and read this. Question: what are the limits of the routing table? To what extent is it necessary to assign numbers in a broadly geographical contiguous manner? Between RIRs, is there some form of pre-allocation? And within an RIR, is there some form of contiguity maintained between one country and another, one city and another? Let's, if you don't mind, these questions are more about the technical side of issuing the numbers, and I will switch into that part of the presentation momentarily. So let's keep these questions and get back to them later in the slides.
No problem.
Thank you. Yeah, here's the transition. That was the focus on the RIRs at a high level, all of the RIRs. And now the set changes focus into more about what ARIN itself is. And then there's actually even more technical slides on number allocation and transfers and routing security. And I will attempt to answer those questions at that time. This is a closer look at ARIN's service region. We have Canada, the US, and these islands in the Caribbean. And our focus is, of course, very similar to what I described as the focus of all the RIRs. We manage the numbers. We have our policy development process, which is multi-stakeholder. We do training and education. We, of course, spend a lot of energy on our website and the services that it supports, and coordinate globally is regarding, as I said earlier, in order for the number registry to work, all 5 RIRs have to coordinate and make essentially one registry work. The ARIN community is, it's even bigger than what this slide says. It's anyone who's interested. But as far as details are concerned, we have essentially 39,000 customers that have obtained resources and are our customers. Of those, we have members, over 7,400. ARIN has a staff of 85, I think we're up to 89 now. And then we have, as part of our community, these stakeholders, governments, law enforcement, civil society, and crucially, anyone who wants to participate. You don't have to be in the ARIN region. We have training. These are actually recorded Zoom events. And if you're interested in seeing one, you can go to the website, register for that Zoom event, and it gives you the opportunity to watch the recording. And the topics as shown here on the screen are V6 planning, basics, getting to know the internet routing registry. There's 2 different courses on that. A webinar about routing security, RPKI, and a webinar about the policy development process. Thank you, Glenn, for putting that link in chat. ARIN has 2 meetings a year. Yes, a note from Glenn, it's worth looking at the other RIRs training as well. All of the RIRs have training and education sections on their websites, and I'd like to say we do a pretty good job on those. ARIN has 2 meetings a year, one in April and one in October. The next meeting for ARIN is scheduled to be in Nashville in the end of April. Remote participation is available. And actually, we've always had remote participation. ARIN has done hybrid meetings since 2000, since we began hosting meetings. So when COVID hit, we just went online completely. The meeting we had in Minneapolis in October of this year had an in-person component. Some people went to the meeting. I don't know what the future holds, but we can hope that ARIN 49 will be in person in Nashville. Fellowship program. Glenn, you asked about this earlier. Yes, to promote diversity and inclusion and more engagement, especially among from regions that we don't typically go to hold a meeting. We have a fellowship program to bring people to our meetings. You have to apply and be in our region, meet the deadlines, and if you're selected, then you get to attend the meeting, and ARIN will pay for your travel and room and board to attend the meeting. Part of the program includes getting paired up with a mentor so that you can better prepare and have somebody to turn to and ask questions during the meeting. It's a great program. We've had people be fellows and come to meetings later and even get elected to the advisory council. So it's a wonderful program. I encourage everyone to think about it if you're interested in attending an ARIN meeting. And as it's been pointed out, some of the other RIRs have fellowship programs as well. So if you're in their regions and you're interested in attending an RIR meeting, check out their fellowship program. And Alfredo says he's been a fellow twice. That's wonderful. Good to hear. We also have a community grant program. This is an opportunity to fund a non-commercial project that broadly benefits the internet, especially in the ARIN service region. And categories include internet technical improvements, improvements to registry processes, outreach on things such as V6 or internet governance, and research. And there's a deadline in spring. A deadline for the grant program is for 2022 is in the spring, and there's a link here for more information. Then put in the chat, thanks to ARIN for sponsoring the VSIG, and you're welcome. It's a pleasure to sponsor this program, Glenn. And now we're going to take a deeper dive into number resources. Here's an example of an IP address, IPv4 and IPv6. IPv4 has a little over 4 billion addresses, and the free pool at the IANA depleted in 2011. IPv6 has a different format. There is, for me personally, an indescribable amount of numbers. We also issue autonomous system numbers. If an IP address, here's an analogy, if an IP address is a street address, then your ASN is like a zip code. That's how I explain it to my family, and it's not perfect, but it suffices as an explanation. This is the hierarchy of distribution. The RIRs issue to ISPs and end user organizations. That's not individual users on the right there. That's big enterprises that wish to get their own number space. And then ISPs can have, of course, have their customers, enterprises, businesses, end user organizations, and they have end user customers, single individual people. ISPs can also have ISPs as customers, but that's not done as much as it used to be done. Global IPv4 exhaustion. As I've said a couple times, in 2011, the IANA ran out of IPv4 space. They issued the remaining IPv4 space to all of the RIRs. So from that point on, the RIRs had a pool of V4 space that was drawn from until now, when we basically have just crumbs. If you look at the right, 2020 is almost nothing. If we go to the next slide.
Einar, before we go to the next slide, Siva has his hand raised. So Siva, if you activate your mic, you can ask your question.
Okay.
Yes, my questions are mostly technically illiterate, so forgive me for asking. in the previous slide, I saw that one of the processes to allocate numbers through an ISP, and on the other side, on the right-hand side, you showed RIRs allocating numbers to the end users. And what do you mean actually? You allocate to large end users ASN numbers, or is it also technically possible for an RIR to allocate an IP address to an end user? And if such a process is there, what would an end user do with that IP address? Does he have to take that number allocated and port it to an ISP, or port it to a network, a larger network in his geographical region?
Siva, thank you for that question. It depends. The question was about assigning numbers to end users. So I would like to clarify, and I'm making a note actually to to update this slide and say end user organizations. So RIRs don't assign numbers to individual people, but we do assign to end user organizations, and it depends on the end user organization's desires if they wish to request an autonomous system number or not. If they get an autonomous system number, then they will try to be autonomous. They'll try to connect at an exchange point or to multiple ISPs and control their own network. If they get an IP address without an autonomous system number, then they of course have to hire an internet service provider to route those addresses for them. Good question. Thank you, Siva.
Yeah, and is it also technically possible that a large organization that gets an IP address, a series of IP addresses allocated to them, can engage or can port those IP addresses to work among multiple ISPs, not one ISP, but multiple ISPs? Can it go through different ISPs at the same time with the numbers allocated?
Yes, and the situation you described is typically done in conjunction with an autonomous system number, so that they can connect to multiple so an organization can connect to multiple ISPs and control their routing through those ISPs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. We were talking about the exhaustion, or the exhaustion of the V4 free pool, and we were showing how much was left. And the previous slide showed in terms of /H, or also sometimes known as legacy class A's. So this shows, and you can see on the left, it's just fractions or percentages. We have AFRINIC has 0.1 or 10% of a /8. If a /8 has 16 million addresses, then that's 1.6 million, and so on. This illustrates that our current free pool of V4 space is extremely low. This is a different topic. This is how much or how many of our members have IPv6 space. And currently, as you can tell here, I'll use ARIN as an example. ARIN has, of all of our members, 51.6% have IPv6 space. And a little piece at the top, that 8.8, means they have V6 space, and as far as we know, they don't have V4. So they might have V4, they might have a small piece that they use for transition, or they might just have gotten V6 without V4.
So Einar, that brings up a question to my mind. Does that mean that if I have a service that uses IPv4 instead of IPv6, I'll need a sort of a resolver to translate that from IPv4 to IPv6?
Yes, the protocols are not compatible on, as they say, on the wire. For V4 to talk to V6 and back and forth, there would be needed some sort of translation device.
And that should be advertised with all the service providers or services that I have through the internet, right?
Well, I think perhaps what you're asking is if somebody gets, for example, V6 addresses only, and they want to connect to the whole internet, they're going to need some sort of service, either run it themselves or get their provider to provide them a gateway to the V4 internet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a detailed look at V4 depletion. Again, 2011 was when IANA ran out, so you can expect that the columns show how much address ARIN had at the time, and our pool was drawn from. 2011 was when we got our last allocation from IANA. So from 2011 to 2012, 2013, you can see those columns diminish until we ran out of space. And I think it's interesting to look at the dotted lines. The dotted lines represent the number of requests for address space. And as ARIN depleted, the requests dropped off, but then they've started to pick back up. And occasionally, we do get some return space. We get crumbs from IANA. So ARIN operates what's called a waiting list. And if you come in to ARIN and get on the waiting list and qualify for space, and should we get some piece of V4, then we go to the top of the list and we will issue space. So organizations are still requesting V4, even though it's somewhat unlikely that they'll get it. But I guess it's better to get in line and have hope.
So Einar, why would some organization request an IPv4 when IPv6 has so many advantages?
That's a great question. It's still, I don't think anyone sees the V4 internet going away. So they're going to be in parallel for a long time, and if you can get some V4 space, it's still useful. But on the other hand, V6 is so plentiful, and it is the future. The ARIN policies for V6 are extremely generous and liberal. You can get a lot of V6 space very easily, and it is the future.
Okay, thank you. Steve, I see you have your hand raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, at this point, it's very pertinent to ask about the so-called new IP proposal, and what is it that they found lacking in IPv6 that someone had to propose a new IP, would not go through at all, but why was that proposal made in that place in the first place, and how is it different from the internet way of allocating IP addresses?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. New IP. New IP is that proposal at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, brought in by a member, and proposing that the ITU develop another parallel set of protocols for the internet. I heard someone at a proponent at the ITU say that the current internet is kind of like the post office. You can write a letter, address it, drop it in the mail, and it reliably gets to its destination. And he said to think of new IP as FedEx, where you can have guaranteed overnight delivery, ship packages. You can get all sorts of additional services with it. But I haven't seen the protocols. I haven't seen a device that operates new IP. They want more control over how networks route and who can access them and how it works. They want the ITU is a government standard development organization. So new IP would be a set of internet protocols developed by governments. Glenn has put into chat a link to an ISOC paper, and wow, that's a great question. It probably could be a whole session all by itself.
Yeah, among other harms, just as FedEx multiplied postage costs by about 100 times, if something like a new IP proposal were to come, then the internet would be expensive on a commercial model, and among various other harms. This is a comment. I'm sorry.
Thank you for that comment. Thank you. It's something that needs to be to be watched and to keep an eye on. Definitely. All right. Well, I've talked about V4 depletion, which is the sad story. The happy story is V6 adoption. V6 adoption has been steadily increasing over time. These are numbers regarding ARIN requests and allocations. And that really interesting spike at 2011 is two things. It's not only the IANA depletion, which caused the media to take notice, but there was also the June IPv6 day in 2011. And I think as a combination of those things, with IANA depletion and the promotion of that V6 day, a lot of organizations in the ARIN region came and requested IPv6 space. And then it tapered a little bit, and then it's back to its steady growth. Current observations. So V6 is slow but steady. Traffic is increasing. If you go to universities in the US, you'll find that many of them are dual stack, and that devices, universities have this interesting thing where kids come in with newer devices every year. So the oldest device amongst the users is probably not more than 4 years old. So V6 works on those devices, and when those students go to watch a YouTube video, they'll be doing that on native with a native V6 connection. And so I've got friends at universities and at university IT departments, and V6 traffic is sometimes half the traffic at the university. Okay, nevertheless, while V6 is increasing, as we've noted, there's still demand for V4. And one of the ways that organizations are getting V4 addresses is with the transfer market. Years ago, at ARIN, someone proposed that we allow transfers between organizations. And after a couple years of very difficult and thorough discussion, a policy was adopted that allows transfers. And so in the ARIN region, if there's an organization that has unused or underutilized address space, that space can be transferred to an organization that has demonstrated need. And not only that, but over time, transfers have been transfer policies have been adopted for transfers between RIRs.
Hmm.
And I pulled, I mentioned the NRO, the Number Resource Organization. We all contribute data and produce a set of slides about number allocations and transfers amongst all the RIRs. And I thought it would be interesting to show the growth of transfers over time. This is intra-RIR. So these are transfers within the RIR. If we look at let's look at the orange columns, that's ARIN. So in 2011, IANA depleted. We still had some numbers. We didn't deplete until several years later. So you don't expect, since you can still get address from ARIN, you don't expect transfers to really take off until ARIN depletes, which occurred. And then you see transfers at ARIN between organizations in the ARIN region peak in 2018, taper off a little bit. I imagine that was due to the economy. And we're December 2021. I'm pretty interested to see what the 21 statistics are, because as far as ARIN's concerned, we went online and operated business as usual. And so transfers happened in 21, and this will be an interesting slide early next year. So the previous slide was transfers within the RIR, and this slide refers to transfers between the RIRs. So for example, if we look at ARIN, we've in total transferred one network address to the LACNIC region, 308 to the RIPE region, 327 to APNIC, and then there have been transfers back to us from some of those regions. I'll point out that AFRINIC has multiple proposals that they're discussing to make an inter-RIR policy, but they don't have one yet. Those discussions are still taking place.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the penultimate slide, and it's about what we're doing regarding security. There's two major developments that we're working on, and this is on top of DNSSEC, which we do, by the way. But routing is very interesting. It needs work, and we've, with the other RIRs, have been working at the IETF to produce RFCs on RPKI, which is Resource Public Key Infrastructure, and it's the first step in securing routing. I'm not going to go into detail on this. There's a whole webinar on the ARIN site on RPKI. The other thing we're doing is validating the routing registry. I don't think I talked very much about this. Who is the registry that shows who a network is registered to. The routing registry is a registry where the organization that has a network address can make a record to show how it's expected to be seen on the internet, how it's expected to be routed. And we are working on that to strengthen that. That's another really important piece of securing internet routing. And that also has a webinar. I think there's actually, there's 2 webinars on securing the internet routing registry. And Q&A, and how are we doing on time? Is it okay if we run over a little bit? Glenn, can I get your thoughts, or Professor Calderon?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, we're fine. Siva had a question going back to, to the ones where he talked about the routing table and so forth.
Okay, let me see if I can scroll. I'm going to scroll in in the tool here and go and see if I can go back to that.
If you want, I can read that for you.
I scrolled up. What are the limits of the routing table?
Yes.
I don't know. I used to keep up with that, but it's been many years since I've kept up with the limits of the routing table. I think you're talking about like how much RAM you can have in a router and how many entries you can have. I'm sorry, I don't know that one. That's really technical. To what extent is it necessary to assign numbers in broadly geographic contiguous manner? What extent is it necessary? Interesting question. There are 5 RIRs, so there is a geographic region in a way, but I don't think that numbers are assigned geographically. It's first come, first serve within those regions who gets numbers. So I don't think it is necessary to assign geographically. Between RIRs,
Yes.
Between RIRs, is there some form of pre-allocation? Siva, could you help me understand that question better?
Yeah, that relates to the contiguity, and so when between RIRs, let's say there are 100 numbers to be allocated worldwide, and ARIN gets 1 to 20, and AFRINIC gets 21 to 40, and likewise each RIR has some broadly contiguous allocations among themselves, out of which they allocate IP addresses. Is that the process, or even between RIRs, it's a first come first served basis? And you were also talking about an RIR handing over IP addresses to another RIR, which indicated some sort of a portability between RIRs. So, which again brings back to my question of the complexity of the routing table. The routing table was simple before transfer of IP addresses between RIRs, and after some number that was originally with some other RIR is transferred to a new RIR, doesn't that routing table get more complicated? So that's, I mean, I was not asking for numbers when I asked about the complexity. I was just asking about the technical concept. And so if all number allocation started in anew, and if everything was on a globally first come first served basis on a number level, not on a ASO, not on a autonomous number level, but on an IP address level, if it was entirely globally on a first come first served basis, wouldn't it have been too much for the routing table to handle?
Great question, Siva. Great questions. It does add complexity. Transfers do add complexity to the routing table. I mean, if you when the registry gets an allocation from the IANA, and then a piece is broken out and transferred to another registry, that does cause complexity. But I don't think it changes the routing table, because there's no overarching route from the RIRs, right? The RIRs get space from the IANA, but we don't route those. We don't announce them. So these pieces that you see transferred on this slide, they might have been a route in the ARIN region, and now they shift over to LACNIC, and now they're a route from the LACNIC region. It's the same number of routes, but it is complex it does cause some complexity to pluck them out. And let's see. When we issue IPv6 space to customers, we we do it with space in between, so that if that customer comes back for more V6 space, they can get a contiguous piece. If they can get a contiguous piece and have the possibility to change their routing and route the larger block. So there's a chance for that to happen. There's no guarantees that'll happen, but it could. And so for every V6 allocation we do, we hope that ISPs can consider and look at doing that.
Siva, you have your hand raised again. You have the mic.
Yes. So again, quite related to that is the scalability of autonomous system numbers. And I understand that the number of ASNs allocated so far worldwide is in thousands. How scalable are autonomous system numbers? Suppose, theoretically speaking, if I were to ask for 1 million AS numbers, or if the RIR were to allocate 1 million autonomous system numbers, would there be a complication? Is it scalable to that extent?
Siva, you ask the best questions. You know, I seem to think maybe Jeff Houston out of APDIC looked at that. I understand the question. We issue AS numbers based on demand, but can we issue 1 million of them? If we have the numbers, we can. But what's the effect on the internet? Those are great. That's a great question, Siva. I don't have an answer for you.
And thank you. Thank you. Where can I get an answer for that question? Who would be an expert to give me an answer, or can you help me with that? Can you pass on this question and sometime later email me a response to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Siva. I will try to figure out who might be able to answer that question, and I will try to get you an answer, or at least a person who might be able to help answer that question.
Thank you, Einar. We will appreciate that, and we will be sharing that information with all the participants in this cohort of close to 100 students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, time is up, and I just want to thank Einar for the excellent, superb explanations and willingful to answer all these tough questions that Siva and maybe I have asked you. So thank you for that. And Glenn, you have the floor.
Thank you again, Einar, for your thoughtful presentation today, and thank you, Siva, for some excellent questions as well. It really keeps you on the toes. Now, you did mention, and Joff, we did record his session. He was our speaker last week. Due to time zone difference, I did a recording rather than him being in the middle of the night being with us. So his session was quite informative last week. So everybody was supposed to watch his video. But again, he's an excellent source to reach out to. But again, this is quite informative, and again, lots of the resources we put into the chat on where you can get additional training. And I did, Bill has been one of the speakers for Nahani Elkin's sessions on very informative webinars as well. But this has been great. Thank you again. And we look forward to keeping in touch. And any final comments, Einar?
Oh, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. Thank you to the participants, and thank you for having me today. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you again.
Okay, so we finished this session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.